Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. First of all, in this video we will talk about the different types in C# and we will end up approaching the notion of constant. To begin with, there are different types of data in C#. We will first talk about the primitive types. So what are the primitive types? They are data types added to the C# language at the lowest level. Here is the list of the most commonly used primitive types in C#. Basically, the list is a little longer, but I decided not to include the rest of the data types because they are hardly used. So it's better to focus on the most used data types to understand better. If you're interested in learning more about the other primitive types, you can always turn to the Microsoft Online documentation. As you can see, this table is composed of 4 categories: integers, real numbers, character, and finally Boolean. The first column represents the data types in C#. Each word is related to a type in the .NET structure. And when you compile your application, the compiler internally translates your code and will look for the same as your C# type, which is in your .NET code. For example, the int in your program will be an int 32 in .NET. Then, the third column will show how many bytes your type uses in memory. I have arranged this table so that it is in ascending order. In the category of integers, the by.NET type takes up the least amount of bytes, and the long.NET type takes up the largest. But you don't need to remember that. The important thing to remember is the last column. For example, a byte can contain a value between 0 and 255. A short is between minus 32,000 and 32,000. An int is between minus 2 billion and 2 billion, and a long is a very high value. We will often use the int type. In the category of real numbers, we have 3 data types: float, double, and decimal. The float is commonly used especially when you need a larger number or greater precision, and then you can use the others. Then we have the char type, which corresponds to the character. The char in C# corresponds to all the Unicode characters. And finally, we have a bool, which represents a Boolean that can be true or false. All the types in this table are very simple. However, real numbers are particular in C#. Let me explain. As you can see in the category of real numbers, we have the float, the double, and the decimal. Here the double is highlighted because it is the default one used by the compiler in C# when you use real numbers. So if you would like to declare a float, then don't forget to specify to the compiler that it is a float. To do this, in addition to having given the type to the variable, you must put a suffix at the end of your number. Indeed, you have to add an F just after the last digit of your number. As you can see below, if I hadn't put the F after it, an error would be displayed because the compiler doesn't know if it should consider it as a float or a double, since the default compiler defines a real number as a double, and it's not possible to put a double in a float type. So it's very important not to forget that. Moreover, it's the same for the decimal, except that here the suffix will not be an F but an M. So there you have it. We are done with primitive types. Please note that in C# some types are not primitive among them. Indeed, there are strings, as we've seen in the previous video, but also arrays, enum, class that correspond to strings, tables, structures, classes. We will see all these notions step by step during our course. Now let's go to the second part of our video, which will deal with the notion of constant. Let's go. We've seen in the previous video the notion of variable. We can reuse this variable in our program, display the value it contains, modify it, etc. It's the same process with the constant, except that the constant can't be modified. Indeed, the value that is contained in the constant can be reused but can never be modified. You may wonder, what's the point exactly? Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that we have created a fighting game. Each player has some VP. You probably know that the player has a maximum and minimum number of VPs. Basically, their maximum is 100 and their minimum is 0. These are values that will not change during our program. The maximum of VP will always be 100 and the minimum will always be 0. The only thing that will change during the fight is the VP of the player, not the minimum or maximum value. Do you understand? So that's what our constant will be used for, to block the end of a value so it won't change if we try to modify it in our program. So let's see now how does it work in C#. Let's go to our IDE. Now we are on IDE, we can delete all this. To create a constant, it's very simple. Type const, the data type that we're going to assign to it will be a number that we can put int and name the constant. Here it's a minimum value, so we can name it minLife. then an equal sign and the value that we want to assign to it, which here is 0. And don't forget the semicolon. Then we will do the same for the maximum life. Go down below and type const, then the data type int, its name life max. Add an equal sign to the max value, which is 100, and don't forget the semicolon as well. Finally, we can create a life variable which will correspond to the life of the player in the game. To do this, type int life is equal to 50 for example, and don't forget the semicolon. We are going to carry out some tests to show that we cannot modify the value of a constant. To do this, go to the line below and type life max is equal to life max minus 1. So what are we going to do? We are going to assign to life max the value contained in life max minus 1. Which means 100 minus 1. However, you can see that to modify the value contained in life max, it must be a variable. And we can't modify the value of a constant, so that's what the constant is used for. We can't modify values that must be in the same during our program. Now, if I want to modify the player's life, I can do it because it's a variable, and this value can undergo changes if the player undergoes damage. Here I will first display the life before the modification. I will type console.writeLine. And put the life variable in brackets without forgetting the semicolon. Then below I will type life is equal to life minus 10 for example. And I will display it again. Then below I will type CW and put a tab on my keyboard. It is a small shortcut on console.writeLine. Put the live variable in brackets and don't forget the semicolon. Now I will run the program. You can see that at the beginning the player's life is at 50. Then the player will suffer a damage of 10 PV. Our life now is 40 PV. So remember that a constant is like a variable, except that the constant is limited. Indeed, its value does not change during the program. The constant will be used when we have values in our program that do not change, like in a video game, or if we create a payment system for a site and we know that the VAT will never change. It will always be 20%. So here in this case, we will also use a constant. There are a lot of cases like this one, so I'm not going to mention all of them. I hope that my explanation were clear and you enjoyed this video. See you soon in a new video.